They say the cruelest silence isn't the one that fills a room, but the one that follows love. A silence that makes you question whether you ever mattered, only to discover later that it was never about your worth, but about their fear of feeling too deeply. When an avoidant reaches out after a long silence, it often stirs a storm within the person on the receiving end. Memories awaken, emotions resurface, and a quiet hope whispers that maybe this time will be different. Yet beneath the surface of that simple message lies something far more complex than a longing for connection. What seems like a step toward reconciliation is often an unconscious return of the shadow, the hidden aspects of the avoidant's psyche seeking resolution, not through genuine emotional openness, but through control and reassurance. The avoidant's silence was never just absence, it was a strategy of emotional regulation, a way to create distance whenever intimacy threatened their fragile sense of safety. When they break that silence, it is rarely because they have overcome their fears. It is because they sense a shift in the energy that once bound you to them. An avoidance text after silence is not always born of love, remorse, or realization. It is often born of curiosity, ego, or the discomfort of losing the emotional upper hand. Deep within, they may feel the pull of the connection they tried to suppress. They might wonder if you've moved on, if the bond that once validated their worth still lingers. This message, however casual it may appear, becomes a psychological probe, a way to test whether the power they once held over you still exists. It's not the return of affection, it's the return of control masked as interest. The words may be simple, "Hey, how have you been?" But what they carry is layered with unspoken motives, a need to know that you still care, that they still matter, that they are not forgotten. The unconscious drives the avoidance behavior far more than logic does. Their reappearance often follows a moment of inner emptiness. After withdrawing, they expect to feel relief. They expect distance to restore their balance. Yet over time, that emptiness grows louder. The silence that once protected them becomes isolating, and they begin to feel the absence of the emotional tether they once rejected. This discomfort is not recognition of love, but a fear of losing emotional significance in someone else's story. They return not because they want to rebuild the bridge, but because they want to make sure it hasn't been burned without their consent. When you receive their message, it's easy to project your own emotions onto their words, to see hope where there's only habit, to see depth where there's only confusion. But to truly see the situation clearly, one must understand that the avoidance return is the psyche's attempt to balance its own contradictions. They fear closeness but also dread being forgotten. They crave love yet flee from vulnerability. This inner conflict creates a cycle of approach and retreat where every silence is a wall and every text is a crack in it. But those cracks don't lead to emotional growth unless the individual has confronted their shadow, the hidden wounds that make them avoidant in the first place. The tragedy is that most avoidants are unaware of this pattern. They don't plan to manipulate. They simply follow the impulses of their fragmented self. Their silence is a defense, their reappearance a reflex. Yet to the one who receives their message, this can feel like a cruel game, a reopening of wounds that were just beginning to heal. The truth is that the avoidance text is not about reconciliation, it's about reassurance. It's their unconscious way of asking, "Do I still matter?" without admitting their fear of losing you. Understanding this dynamic transforms the way you respond. Instead of seeing their message as a sign of hope, you begin to see it as an echo of their unresolved conflict. You realize that their silence was not a rejection of you, but a rejection of their own emotional depth. And their return is not an embrace of connection, but a struggle against the emptiness that silence could not fill. The message they send is not an invitation back into love. It is a mirror, reflecting the state of their inner world, a world where fear still governs affection and control, still overshadows vulnerability. When the avoidant pulls away, it often feels like you've lost all control. You wait for replies that never come, analyze silences, and wonder what you did wrong. Yet something powerful begins to happen the moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop seeking closure. It's an invisible shift, an energetic reversal that changes the entire dynamic between you and the avoidant. The one who once seemed to hold all the power suddenly begins to feel its loss. What they once used as a shield, silence, withdrawal, emotional detachment, becomes a wall that traps them instead of protecting them. This shift doesn't happen through confrontation or anger. It happens through emotional stillness, through your refusal to feed the pattern. Avoidants thrive in a dynamic where the other person chases. They unconsciously rely on your emotional pursuit to reaffirm their worth while maintaining the illusion of independence. When you stop playing that role, the mirror breaks. They no longer see themselves reflected through your longing or pain. That absence of emotional feedback unsettles them because it disturbs the structure that kept their fears hidden. They sense something has changed, something they can't control anymore, and it awakens the discomfort they've worked so hard to suppress. The very silence they use to dominate the emotional field now becomes the silence that confronts them. Your detachment doesn't just free you, it exposes them to themselves. When you reach a point where your peace matters more than their attention, you become untouchable. The avoidance power has always existed in the emotional reaction they could provoke. Every unanswered message, every cold withdrawal, every vague excuse, they were all designed, consciously or not, to make you question your worth. But the moment you stop reacting, you dismantle that power completely. Detachment is not indifference, it is awareness without emotional dependence. It means seeing through the illusion of control and recognizing that your value is not determined by how much someone chooses to engage with you. This understanding creates a silent reversal. Now, it is they who begin to feel the weight of distance, they who sense the disconnection they once orchestrated. The avoidance psyche depends on maintaining emotional superiority. They avoid intimacy because vulnerability feels dangerous, yet they still need to feel significant. When you no longer seek them, their defense mechanism starts to collapse. They become curious, then uneasy, then quietly anxious. They start to wonder if you've truly moved on, if their hold on you has disappeared. What once felt safe, being pursued while remaining distant, now becomes a void they can't control. They text, not because they've changed, but because the silence they created has turned against them. It no longer provides comfort. It mirrors their own emptiness. This power shift isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the emotional balance that was lost when you were trapped in the cycle of pursuit and withdrawal. You are no longer the one begging for clarity or over-explaining your feelings. You are the one who holds calm in the middle of chaos. The energy that once drained you now belongs to you again. Your boundaries, once dismissed, become the new language of strength. You learn that silence can speak louder than confrontation, that not responding can be more powerful than any explanation. The avoidant, upon sensing this change, may attempt to pull you back into the pattern. They may send a casual message, pretend nothing happened, or suddenly show concern. But the difference now is that you are no longer reacting from the wound. The same text that once made your heart race now only stirs quiet recognition. You've seen behind the mask. You understand the game. You know that their words are not a bridge to intimacy, but an instinctive attempt to restore control. And in that moment, the power they once had dissolves completely. Because the energy is shifted, not through force, but through your calm refusal to be moved by fear or longing. The silence that once broke you now protects you, and the distance that once belonged to them now belongs to you. Avoidants live in contradiction. They crave connection, yet fear it, long for closeness, yet retreat the moment it begins to form. When they text you after silence, it's rarely because they've resolved this conflict. It's because they're being drawn once again toward what they both desire and dread. At the core of this paradox lies the mirror effect, a psychological reflection that reveals their inner struggle through your response. When you reply with calm neutrality rather than emotion, you no longer play the role of validation they once depended on. You hold up a mirror that forces them to confront what they've been running from, their own emptiness, avoidance, and inability to sustain genuine intimacy. An avoidant seeks emotional control as a defense mechanism. They fear being engulfed, losing themselves in closeness, or being judged for their vulnerability. This fear drives them to create distance, not because they don't care, but because caring exposes them to potential rejection or disappointment. When they withdraw, they expect you to fill the space with pursuit, to reach out, to question, to prove that you still care. That reaction comforts them because it confirms their importance without demanding emotional exposure. But when you meet their return with emotional calm instead of longing, something unfamiliar happens. Their reflection no longer shows power, it shows their fear. Your composure reflects their chaos, and your silence mirrors the emptiness they've tried to project onto you. The mirror effect operates on a level beyond conscious awareness. Avoidants often externalize their inner turmoil. They attribute their discomfort to the relationship, to the other person, to the situation. But when you refuse to play the emotional part they expect, they can no longer project those feelings outward. The discomfort turns inward. They begin to sense the emotional void within themselves. Your lack of reaction acts as a psychological confrontation, revealing the truth they've buried under layers of control and detachment. It's not cruelty that unsettles them. It's the quiet realization that they are the architect of their own disconnection. When an avoidant reaches out, they may do so with charm or subtle nostalgia. They test the waters to see if the emotional dynamic remains intact. But when they're met with warmth that doesn't chase, with kindness that doesn't plead, with silence that doesn't beg, they lose their grip. Their return was meant to re-establish the old pattern, yet now the mirror shows something entirely different. Your independence, your peace, your unavailability to their emotional games. This reflection becomes unbearable because it exposes the truth. They can no longer define their worth through your reactions. They must face themselves without the comfort of your emotional pursuit. This is why emotional neutrality is so powerful. It doesn't attack, accuse, or beg. It simply reflects. It forces the avoidant to see that their silence no longer wounds you, that their absence no longer holds meaning. They encounter their own behavior through your detachment, and in that reflection lies their discomfort. For the first time, they feel what they once made you feel: uncertainty, distance, and the sense of being emotionally unseen. The same silence they used to control you now confronts them. The mirror effect is not about punishment, it's about truth. When you detach with grace, you stop participating in the illusion that connection can exist without vulnerability. Your steadiness reveals their instability, your peace exposes their turmoil, and your stillness uncovers their fear of emotional exposure. They begin to see that their patterns don't protect them, they isolate them. What once felt like control begins to feel like loneliness. The power of reflection lies in showing, not telling. No amount of words can make an avoidant realize their patterns, but your energy can. When they see that you no longer respond from pain, they understand that something within you has changed. You've broken the invisible contract that kept you bound to their emotional rhythm. And while they may never say it, that realization cuts deeper than any argument could. Because in the mirror of your calm detachment, they finally see what their avoidance has cost them, not your love, but the illusion of power they once held. The most brutal reply to an avoidance message after silence is not one filled with anger, accusation, or pain. It is the one that carries no emotional charge at all. Emotional neutrality is devastating to the avoidant because it dismantles the psychological structure they've relied upon to maintain control. Their power has always existed in emotional imbalance. They withdraw, and you react. They disappear, and you chase. They create confusion, and you seek clarity. Every reaction you offer feeds their sense of significance and keeps the cycle alive. But when you respond from a state of calm detachment, when your tone is grounded, short, and free of longing, you interrupt that cycle completely. The avoidant, who has always felt safest when you are emotionally unsteady, suddenly encounters a version of you they can no longer manipulate or predict. A neutral reply, such as, "I hope you're well," carries a psychological weight that far exceeds its simplicity. It tells the avoidant that you are no longer emotionally dependent on them, that their absence no longer controls you. It is not a message of hostility. It is a quiet declaration of freedom. You are not ignoring them out of spite, nor are you engaging out of hope. You are responding from emotional maturity. This neutrality is the emotional equivalent of a locked door, calm, composed, unbothered. To the avoidant, who once thrived on your intensity and your yearning, this becomes disorienting. Their return was meant to reawaken your emotional investment, to confirm that they still mattered, but your composure denies them that comfort. Silence, too, can be even more powerful than words. Refusing to respond at all, not from pride but from peace, leaves the avoidant facing the one thing they fear most, themselves. Their text, often disguised as casual curiosity, was a subconscious attempt to check if they still hold emotional space within you. When no response arrives, that check fails. The void they once filled with your attention now stares back at them as a reflection of their own emotional emptiness. The silence that once protected them becomes the silence that exposes them. For someone who avoids intimacy to feel safe, your indifference feels like the ultimate loss of control. It tells them that the bond they took for granted has dissolved into neutrality, that their hold over your emotions no longer exists. This response is brutal because it breaks the emotional symmetry they were counting on. The avoidant returns, expecting to find you where they left you, waiting, wondering, hoping. Instead, they find someone who has emotionally outgrown them. Your energy no longer feeds their pattern, and that recognition pierces deeper than any confrontation could. They are forced to confront the emptiness behind their behavior, the realization that their silence has cost them more than comfort. It has cost them significance. The avoidance survives through distance, but when that distance no longer evokes pursuit, they are left alone with the truth that the game has ended. The brutal reply, therefore, is not meant to wound, but to declare transformation. It doesn't shout, it whispers with strength. It shows that the person who once pleaded for connection has now found peace in separation. This quiet strength unsettles the avoidant because it reveals a reality they have long denied. That love cannot coexist with emotional games, that connection cannot survive without vulnerability. When they see that your calm is genuine, that it isn't a tactic, but a reflection of healing, they realize they have lost the very thing their control was meant to preserve. This kind of reply doesn't seek revenge, it ends the illusion. The avoidance return was a test of whether you still belong to their emotional orbit. Your calm response tells them that orbit has collapsed. Whether you choose silence or a brief, composed acknowledgement, you are no longer performing for their validation. The power has shifted completely, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting at all. Your peace becomes their reckoning, and that realization, the quiet recognition that they can no longer affect you, is what truly destroys them. The final victory in the dynamic with an avoidant is not found in revenge, anger, or even indifference. It is found in transformation. When you reach a point where their silence no longer shakes you, when their return no longer ignites confusion or hope, you've entered a state of inner alchemy. This is the process where pain is not denied but transmuted, where the very wound that once made you chase now becomes the source of your strength. The avoidance patterns lose all meaning once you stop reacting to them, because their power never came from what they did. It came from how deeply you felt it. The moment your emotions stop being dictated by their presence or absence, the illusion of control shatters. You are no longer the same person who once sought validation from someone incapable of giving it. You've evolved into someone who no longer needs it. This transformation begins quietly. It's not the dramatic moment of saying, "I'm done," but the gradual realization that you don't need closure from the very person who caused the wound. You understand that the avoidance distance was never about your worth, but about their fear. They avoided not because you were too much, but because they could not face their own depths. And when that understanding finally settles within you, compassion replaces bitterness. You stop seeing them as the villain and start recognizing them as someone trapped in their own defenses. Yet this compassion doesn't mean you let them back in. It simply means you release the grip of resentment that once tethered you to their behavior. Inner alchemy is not about winning, it's about reclaiming your energy. You begin to see that everything the avoidant tried to suppress in you, your emotions, your vulnerability, your need for connection, is exactly what gives you power. The parts of yourself that felt too much were never flaws. They were expressions of authenticity that frightened those who hadn't yet faced their own truth. When you embrace your emotional depth instead of shrinking it to make others comfortable, you step into your highest form of strength. You no longer seek validation because you've become your own source of it. This shift is what truly destroys the avoidance hold. Not your silence, not your replies, but your wholeness. When the avoidant senses that they can no longer affect your peace, they experience a deep internal dissonance. The pattern that once gave them control no longer works. They might reach out again, trying to evoke old emotions, testing if the bond still exists, but your energy has changed. You no longer engage from the wound, but from awareness. You can respond with kindness without attachment, or with silence without resentment. Either way, they feel the difference. What once gave them validation now gives them reflection. They see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time, and what they see is someone whose fear cost them something real. True power doesn't come from silence alone. It comes from the calm that follows healing. You are no longer using silence as a defense or a strategy. It becomes a natural expression of your peace. You realize that the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all, because indifference born from growth is louder than any reaction born from pain. This is the ultimate destruction for the avoidant, not because you've hurt them, but because you've broken the emotional dependency that once defined the connection. They are left facing the void they created, while you move forward carrying the lessons, but not the weight. This inner transformation turns suffering into wisdom. It teaches that every heartbreak, every unanswered message, and every moment of silence was guiding you back to yourself. The avoidance return no longer matters because you've already returned to your own center. You no longer need to prove your worth to anyone who couldn't see it. You embody it. The brutal truth is that your peace is the most devastating answer to their avoidance, because peace cannot be manipulated, and love rooted in self-awareness can never be controlled. The journey with an avoidant is not about teaching them a lesson, it's about remembering your own. The moment they text after silence is not your cue to reopen old doors, but your invitation to recognize how far you've come. You've walked through the confusion, the longing, and the ache of unanswered emotion, only to emerge stronger, quieter, and free. The reply that destroys them isn't written in words. It's written in your energy, in the peace that no longer trembles for their attention. You've learned that love without safety isn't love at all, that silence can speak truth when words deceive, and that the most powerful response is the one that comes from self-respect. When they return, you don't need to remind them of what they lost. Your calm presence already does that. What once broke you has now built you, and that transformation is something no message, no silence, and no avoidance can ever take away.